In the spring of 1591, the most powerful empire in West Africa stood on the edge of oblivion. For over a century, the Songhai Empire had commanded the Great Bend of the Niger River, controlling trade routes that stretched from the Atlantic coast to the heart of the Sahara. Its cities gleamed with wealth. Its universities attracted scholars from 3 continents. Its armies had never known defeat on their own soil. But now, a foreign force was crossing the desert, 4,000 soldiers marching through 1,500 miles of scorching wasteland, driven by ambition and armed with a weapon that would change African warfare forever: the gunpowder rifle. This is the story of how the greatest empire in West African history fell in a single afternoon. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, we need to step back to the empire's golden age. The Songhai Empire didn't emerge from nowhere. It rose from the ashes of the Mali Empire in the mid-15th century, when a brilliant military commander named Sunni Ali seized control of the region. Sunni Ali was a warrior king in every sense, ruthless, strategic, and relentless. He conquered the legendary city of Timbuktu in 1468, then turned his armies toward Gen, a vital trading hub that controlled the inland delta of the Niger River. After a 7-year siege, Gen fell, and with it, Sunni Ali secured control over the most valuable commercial network in West Africa. But it was under the Askia dynasty, beginning with Askia Muhammad in 1493, that Songhai truly became an empire. Askia Muhammad was a different kind of ruler, a reformer, an administrator, a devout Muslim who organized his realm into provinces, each with appointed governors and standardized laws. He expanded the empire's territory from the Senegal River in the west to modern-day Niger in the east, from the Sahara in the north to the forests of present-day Nigeria in the south. At its peak, Songhai was larger than Western Europe. The empire's wealth flowed from trade. Gold from the Akan forests in the south. Salt from the mines of Tagaza in the Sahara. Kola nuts, ivory, enslaved people, and manuscripts. Timbuktu alone housed hundreds of thousands of books in its libraries and madrasas. The Sankore University became a beacon of Islamic learning, drawing students and scholars from Cairo, Baghdad, and Granada. The empire's capital, Gao, bustled with merchants speaking a dozen languages. Songhai was not just powerful. It was cosmopolitan, cultured, and for a time, untouchable. But empires don't fall because they are weak. They fall because someone stronger, or more desperate, decides to take what they have. Across the Sahara, in Morocco, Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur had a problem. He had recently unified Morocco after decades of internal strife, but his treasury was running dry. Wars cost money. Loyalty costs money. And Morocco, despite controlling the northern end of the trans-Saharan trade routes, was only getting a fraction of the wealth that flowed through West Africa. The real treasure, the gold, the salt, the taxes on trade, all of that belonged to Songhai. Al-Mansur looked south and saw opportunity. He knew that the Songhai military was formidable, tens of thousands strong, with cavalry that had dominated the Sahel for generations. But he also knew something else: they didn't have firearms. Morocco did. For years, Al-Mansur had been modernizing his military along European lines, equipping his soldiers with arquebus, early matchlock muskets, and training them in volley fire tactics. It was a calculated gamble. If he could get his army across the Sahara alive, he believed technology would tip the scales. The excuse came in 1590. Al-Mansur demanded control of the Tagaza salt mines, which lay in disputed territory between Morocco and Songhai. When Askia Ishaq II, the Songhai ruler, refused, Al-Mansur had his pretext for war. He assembled a force of 4,000 men, including Spanish and Portuguese mercenaries, Moroccan soldiers, and Ottoman-trained gunners, and placed them under the command of a Spanish eunuch named Judar Pasha. In October 1590, they began their march across the Sahara. The journey itself was a nightmare. The Moroccan army crossed some of the harshest terrain on earth, endless dunes, waterless stretches that lasted for days, temperatures that could kill a man in hours. Hundreds died along the way. Camels collapsed under the weight of weapons and supplies. By the time Judar Pasha's force reached the Niger River in February 1591, they had been reduced, battered, and exhausted. But they were still armed. And they were still trained. Askia Ishaq II knew they were coming. He mobilized the full strength of the Songhai military. Estimates suggest between 30,000 and 40,000 soldiers, including elite cavalry units and infantry armed with spears, bows, and swords. On paper, it should have been a massacre. The Songhai outnumbered the Moroccans 10-1. The two armies met on March 13, 1591, at a place called Tondabai, just north of Gao. The Songhai forces advanced in traditional formation, waves of cavalry charging across the open plain, infantry following behind, confident in their numbers and their experience. They had never lost a battle on their own soil. They had no reason to believe this would be different. And then the Moroccans opened fire. The sound alone was unprecedented. The Songhai horses, which had never heard gunfire before, panicked. Riders were thrown. Lines broke. And the Moroccan musketeers kept firing, volley after volley, disciplined and methodical. The Songhai warriors fought bravely. They charged again and again, trying to close the distance, trying to bring the fight to hand-to-hand combat where their numbers would matter. But each time, the guns cut them down. By the end of the day, the Songhai army was shattered. Thousands lay dead on the field. Askia is shocked too fled east, abandoning Gao to the invaders. The Battle of Tondabai had lasted only a few hours, but it decided the fate of an empire. The fall of Songhai wasn't just military, it was systemic. The Moroccans occupied Gao, then Timbuktu, then Jen. They looted the treasuries. They seized control of the trade routes. They executed scholars and merchants who resisted. But Morocco never truly controlled the empire. They held the cities, but the countryside remained hostile. Local leaders refused to submit. Rival factions emerged, each claiming to be the legitimate successors of the Askia dynasty. Askia is shocked too tried to rally resistance from the east, but his authority was broken. Within a year, he was deposed by his own generals. The Moroccan forces, meanwhile, found themselves trapped in a hostile land, thousands of miles from home. Supplies didn't come. Reinforcements didn't come. The soldiers who had crossed the Sahara began to intermarry with local populations, forming a new military caste called the Arma, who ruled the Niger Bend for the next 2 centuries, but they were never strong enough to reunite the empire. The trade networks that had made Songhai wealthy collapsed. Merchants rerouted their caravans to avoid the chaos. The gold that had flowed north to Morocco and beyond slowed to a trickle. Timbuktu, once the intellectual capital of West Africa, saw its scholars scattered, its libraries burned or sold off. The great university at Sankore fell silent. Within a generation, the Songhai Empire had fragmented into a patchwork of small kingdoms and city-states, none of them powerful enough to restore what had been lost. So what did the fall of Songhai mean for West Africa, and for the world? Economically, it was catastrophic. The trans-Saharan trade routes, which had connected West Africa to the Mediterranean and the Middle East for centuries, never fully recovered. The disruption came at the worst possible time, just as European powers were beginning to establish Atlantic trade networks along the West African coast. The balance of trade shifted. Coastal kingdoms like Dahomey and Asante rose in power, while the interior, once the heart of African commerce, was marginalized. Culturally, the damage was immense. Timbuktu never regained its former status as a center of learning. Thousands of manuscripts were lost, stolen, or destroyed. The intellectual tradition that had flourished under Songhai's patronage survived in fragments, preserved by families who hid their libraries for generations. Geopolitically, the fall of Songhai marked the beginning of a new era in African history. The old land-based empires of the Sahel gave way to smaller, more militarized states. The arrival of firearms changed the nature of African warfare. And within a century, the Atlantic slave trade would accelerate, drawing millions of people from the West African interior toward the coast, a tragic migration made easier by the political fragmentation that followed Songhai's collapse. But Songhai's legacy didn't disappear. The memory of the empire lived on in oral histories, in the genealogies of ruling families, in the architecture of Timbuktu and Gao, and in the manuscripts that survived. Today, historians recognize Songhai as one of the largest and most sophisticated empires in African history, a testament to what was possible in the pre-colonial world. The fall of the Songhai Empire was not inevitable. It was the result of specific choices, specific technologies, and a single, fateful battle. But its consequences echoed for centuries. Sometimes, history turns on a single afternoon. And sometimes, what falls can never be rebuilt.